Alright, in this video I am going to show you how I mounted all three of the stepper motors onto the CNC machine. They all required custom mounting assemblies and various different blocks, and how I had to get them all to fit in here. So I'm going to show you all of that in this video. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, so the first step in mounting the stepper motors is getting this lead screw for the Z-axis in place. And I have it here. I have the coupler installed on the top. This will take it from a 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch for the motor shaft on this end, and a 1/2 inch down here for the lead screw. And I have the anti-backlash nut installed right here, and it's bolted in. And right now, because the anti-backlash nut is in place, when I raise the Z-axis, the entire lead screw raises. And there is a bearing right here around the lead screw on the top, as well as a bearing down here on the bottom. And I still need to get some collars to go around the lead screw. At least one. I want to put a collar down here on the lead screw right here, just above the bearing, to help hold the bearing in place. And let's see, as far as mounting the motor, I have some wooden blocks that I had cut out previously for a different project. So I have a few of these, and let me set the camera down here, and then I'll show you for the motor mount. And let me put this underneath here so this doesn't fall down. There we go. For the motor mount, no, I need to drop that down so you can see it better, how that's going to look. Let me line that up with the bearing. There we go. Okay, so the blocks here will fit around these, and then the motor will sit on top of these blocks like this. So if I take these blocks off, then the shaft of the motor will fit into this coupler just like that. And the motor, it has to be mounted up away from the surface, because that coupler is there, and you want to also have room to be able to access these set screws. So what I'm going to do on these blocks is cut a slot out of each one of these, so that there will be an opening, so I'll be able to, even when these are in place and the motor's on here, we'll be able to access through here to be able to get to that. So that's how the Z-axis motor is going to be mounted. And then the other thing is how to securely attach this. And I'm thinking I'll just drill a hole all the way through here and attach it with some long screws. So then the question is, what kind of screws to use? So the screws need to be able to fit inside the mounting holes here on the motor. There are 4 mounting holes in the corners, and the motor itself comes quite close to these, so you have to be careful. Here's a number 8 by 32 screw with a like a normal, either a Phillips and a regular head. And if you put that in there, it doesn't sit very well, because the head of the screw is too big to be able to properly sit in that channel. So if you're going to go with this type of screw, then you're going to want to get something that has a smaller head to it. This is also an 832. This is 3 inches long, and if we put this one in here, then you can see it sits in here flush up against the base of the motor mount there, and it'll sit in there firmly. So this one will work. An 832 a screw, they need to, they need to be long like this. Unfortunately, a 3-inch screw, if we take it back up here, is not actually long enough to go all the way through to be able to fit a nut on the bottom there. So I need longer than that, and since I'm going to order it, I tried to go to my local hardware store, and they don't have, in 832, they don't have anything longer than 3 inches. I'd have to go to a 1/4 inch to get anything, like a 1/4 20, to be able to get anything longer than 3 inches. So, and a 1/4 20 will not go through this. The largest, I guess, standard size bolt is a number 8 that will fit through these holes. If you're going metric, you would want to go with a number 4. So a number 4 will fit in here just nice. And this is a hex cap head, so it also sits in there very firmly. This is the best type of a screw to use, is because you can use an Allen wrench here. It's very secure. And so what I did is I ordered some M4 screws at 90 millimeters long, which is around 3.5 inches. So I'm going to use those when they arrive to bolt the motors all the way through and put a nut on the bottom of this board here. And that with the collar, so get the collar on the lead screw and the longer bolts, and cut the slots in these blocks of wood so we can access the set screws in the coupler. And I think this Z-axis should be ready. So there's one other thing I want to talk about. There were some comments in the previous video about what axis is what, and I think it all comes down to, what do you consider to be the front of the machine? So if this was like a 3D printer, then the front of the machine would be looking at it from this direction. So this would be the front of the machine looking on it. But because this machine is so long, I tend to operate it, and I think I'll be operating it from the side. So if this is the front of the machine looking at it this way, then I might actually want to switch this and call this the x-axis, and then this would be the y-axis, and of course this remains the z-axis. So, as far as that goes, I haven't really decided yet. From a 3D printer point of view, then this would be the y-axis and this would be the x-axis. But because this machine sits at the table like this, I might want to switch the x and the y-axis around. Anyway, I'm still thinking about that, and I'll let you know. All right, let's move on to the other motors now. This is what I have so far for the motor mount for the next axis, and the way this works is the motor will screw onto this block. I've got the hole cut in here for the extra little bit of the motor that sticks out there, and I can't really put the sprocket on this side of the motor because then that's not going to leave enough room for the chain to wrap around there. So because the motor has the armature that comes out of both ends, on this side I made a block of wood to kind of go around the motor, and I'm planning on putting the sprocket on this side and then have the idler sprocket situated probably about right here. And then what will happen is let's see, if that's about right here, I'm going to have the chain come in this way around the sprocket and around the idler and then out that way. So it'll kind of wrap around and it'll kind of make a little detour there. And that should hold the chain up against the motor sprocket nice and tight and hold everything in place. Now, And by doing this, one of the things I'm worried about is this wood is not very secure. It's quite thin down here at the bottom. So I'm thinking of maybe putting a thin layer of plywood over this and just cutting a hole out for the plywood, so there'll be a whole piece of plywood over this, not as thick as this 3/4 inch plywood, but just a thin, maybe like a piece of the, what was it, like the 6mm plywood or something like that. Cover that so that this wood has something to bond to, so it's not, I'll show you what I'm talking about. This, I'm worried this is just going to be too flimsy and not very rigid, so I need to reinforce this. Alright, so this is the piece that I made. I was talking about reinforcing this. I've got it clamped while it's gluing, and this is a piece of 5mm plywood that I just put on the back. I drilled a hole for the armature of the stepper motor to go through, and this glued onto the back should reinforce these pieces of plywood that are kind of thin. This set of transfer punches makes it very easy to mark the exact position of the holes, for instance in this motor mount. So by putting the motor on top of the mount and positioning exactly where I need it to be, and then drawing an outline with the pencil, it's very easy to insert this punch into the hole of the motor from this way, and marking here with a slight tap of a hammer, and it puts a little dimple exactly where the holes need to be drilled. Each of the punches comes in different sizes, and they're all have a point that is in the center of the hole, so it makes it very easy to mark the center of a hole no matter what size of the hole we have. The next step is to get a top put on, and right now I only screwed this down with a screw in each corner. There will be eventually 4 on each side, and these are all held in place with cross dowels. And this is where I'm going to mount another motor, so I needed to get this top board on there so that I can start mounting the other motor. And all in all, I'm working from the bottom up, so from here, the z-axis, putting this one in place right here. The motor mount will go in here, and the next motor will be sitting on its side right about here, and that leaves the third motor, which will go up top facing this direction like this. And I wanted to start from the bottom and going up, just to make sure that when I start to mount this top motor that it doesn't run into or run up against the other 2 motors that are here. So alright, so time to mount the third motor. I thought I would show you where I'm getting all of these blocks with the holes drilled out of them. I actually have a whole box full of them that I made a long time ago, maybe a couple years ago now, for another project that I haven't finished, but the idea for this is that these were going to be bearing block holders, and I've got, for instance, this linear bearing. It's still in its plastic here to keep it from rusting, but this bearing would fit down in these holes, and it would take 3 of these blocks to match the length of the bearing, and that would give a complete wooden mount for these linear bearings, and then those could slide along the linear round rods. But since I'm not doing that project, I've got this box full of little wooden blocks with holes in them, and I've even got the holes that I drilled out in here. I actually used some of these on my workbench when I was making the ends of my handles. So yeah, it's always good to keep little things like that. You never know where they're going to come in handy, And these are turning out to be the perfect size for mounting these stepper motors on the CNC. This is the motor mount that I've made for the upper motor, and it's a little hard to see it behind all the clamps. This block of wood right here is just a spacer to maintain the distance. It's not actually part of the motor mount, but the motor will sit down inside here through that hole right there, with the ends of the shafts, the armatures, coming out this end and coming out this end. And I like to make these mounts like this, kind of almost like how would I put it? Modular, so would be a good term. Something that's kind of self-sufficient, so that it can stand on its own, and then once it's all in place and the motor can be mounted, I can take the whole mount and flip it up and put it up here underneath the shelf. That way I'm not trying to glue and screw all these pieces together up here in the final place. And if I ever need to take it out, I should be able to take the entire motor mount out as a whole unit. So that's the idea, and I just need to wait for the wood glue to dry now, and then put some screws in it to reinforce it, and it should be ready after that to mount on the top board of the gantry. I've taken the motor mount out of the clamps, or I've taken the clamps off the motor mount and started to install the motor, and I think I'm going to take the motor back out and cut a slot in here. When I first built this, I didn't want to cut a slot like I had done for this motor mount that goes on the Z-axis, so that we can get Allen wrenches in here to be able to take the coupling on and off, or tighten the coupling. So I didn't want to cut a slot in this piece of wood, because I wanted to be able to clamp it securely without any flexing caused by an open gap. And I've been debating whether or not it actually needs access to this, and I think I'm going to put access, because it's not just about assembly or disassembly of this machine. If I ever need to, let's say, tighten these screws, maybe they start slipping and I need to check them and make sure that they're tight, I think it's going to be important to have access to this to be able to make sure that those set screws in this coupler, it's easier to probably see the set screws in this other coupler. So this is a similar coupler to the one that's on here right now, and it has 4 set screws in it. So in order to be able to make sure that those are tight, I think I am going to cut a slot in here. Alright, here is the motor fully mounted in the motor mount after I cut the slot in the mounting bracket so that we'll have access to the set screws. I think this is all ready. Now I have to figure out how to mount this whole thing to the underside of the top board, so it will sit underneath this top board, underneath here, and I need to make sure that it doesn't interfere with the Z-axis. So the Z-axis will be sitting up here, so it'll need to be mounted a little bit further back, so that it doesn't hit this stepper motor here. I also took off all of the clamps on this motor mount. This is the one where there was the slot here, this elaborate pattern cut in the bracket to be able to hold the back of the motor, that I reinforced with a bit of plywood, and then I glued it onto this backing board here. And I also put in another piece of plywood to act as a support for this board sticking up here, so that gives a lot more gluing surface here and makes this much stronger. And this will be paired up with this motor, and this will fit in here. Just slide in like that. And I don't need to cut a slot in here because there's not going to be anything on this end of the motor. We're doing this and reversing this motor around specifically so that we can get this armature out here and work with this. So this will be the end that gets the gear placed right here like that. And then I need to drill a hole and mount this idler sprocket right about maybe somewhere in here like this. So that'll be the next step, is to get this motor mount assembly put together, and this motor mount assembly is going to sit back here just like this. Actually, it'll be turned around. This is backwards. So let me see if I can turn this around like this. So it'll situate like this, and there'll be a chain coming across here, and I'll have to drill some holes in the side here. That chain will come through. The chain will be fixed, and what happens is, as that gear turns, it's going to pull itself along the chain. So the chain will remain fixed in place, and the motor will just kind of walk this entire assembly back and forth along this axis. And I was previously calling this the x-axis, and that makes sense if you're looking at the entire machine from this direction. But I don't think that's the way I'm going to be operating this. And there were some comments previously about having the x-axis along the longest length of the machine, and I think that actually fits better with how I'm going to be operating this machine. So I think this is going to be the front of the machine, and that makes sense then for this to be the x-axis, and along this way will be the y-axis. So that means that as this moves along, this will be the y-axis as it moves back and forth this way. And as the entire gantry moves back and forth, that will be the x-axis. Alright, so I need to mount this, and then like I mentioned previously, I need to mount this motor. This one will go upside down like this. So, alright, the next video I should have these all mounted, and I'll show you what it looks like when they're all mounted in place. This is actually the first time that I've needed to use this really long 1/4-inch drill bit. I mean, it goes from back here all the way to here. And the reason is because, well, I took the top off to have room to drill this hole back here in the motor mount, but the drill was too close to this edge to be able to drill straight, to be able to drill that hole straight. So I need this extra long drill bit to be able to drill this hole. I just received the M4 90mm bolts that I need to be able to connect the Z-axis stepper motor, and these are long enough to go all the way through the motor mounts, and through the wood here. So here, this one is sticking out here on the end, so that will allow me to connect this Z motor stepper and get it completely mounted. Now that I have the Z-axis stepper motor mounted, and I have the main bracket for the what will be the Y-axis stepper motor mounted, this one, the back end of this, I don't want to glue it in place, because then I won't be able to get the motor out of this motor mount assembly. So this will have to be free to come in and out, and I'll need to screw it in instead of gluing this block in. But as you can see, the motor doesn't come out now because it's hitting the Z-axis motor mount. So I might need to cut off a little bit of the end of these bolts, and that should give enough room for the Y-axis motor to be able to slide out. Then the question is how to attach this, how to screw it in to this board down here. And there's not a lot of room back in here. So what I think I'm going to do is trim off this wood right here so it's flush, and then put some extra wood on the sides. This wood will be glued on to the bottom piece down here, and then I think that will let me drive a screw in through here to hold this motor plate here in position. So I finished this motor mount. Let's see, there's certain things that I did. I mentioned earlier, I went ahead and cut off the excess bolts that were sticking out here so that we'll be able to get the motor in. I built up extra wooden sides on either side and put a top in place. Now the two sides are glued into the bottom plate, but nothing is gluing in the motor plate, the motor mounting plate, and also this top piece of wood is not glued in. Some other things that I did is I mounted the idle sprocket, and the way the chain will route is it'll come through the bottom around this little motor sprocket, and then it will come underneath the idle sprocket, around over the idle sprocket, and out this way. So that way the chain will be able to wrap around the motor sprocket quite well, and we should be able to get a good grip on it. Let's see, some other things. If we take a look at the bottom, we can see some inserts that have been drilled in to provide room for it to sit on top of these, which stick out. There are 4 bolts here that stick out, so that is what these inserts, this one, and these 2 are for. The other 3 holes are to bolt this entire motor mount onto the top of the CNC through these 3 holes. So let me show you what it's like to take this apart, and you can see there are 3 screws that have to come out. One there, one on the top, and one more on this side. Those screws will firmly secure the motor mount plate, even though it's held in place quite with a well-fitting box around it. I wanted to actually screw it in to hold it in place. And then taking these 4 screws off will allow the entire motor to come in and out. So here is the screws have all been removed, and the top plate is off. That's this one. And the motor will come out by just sliding it out. Let me try to hold the camera with this hand by sliding it out this way. And then once it's out, then the motor can come completely out. And then once the motor is out, we'll be able to bolt down the motor mount to the CNC. There was one hole here that I drilled by accident. But it's covered up by the motor mounting plate, but yeah, I did drill one by accident. Alright, so that should work. I'm going to make sure that by cutting off those excess bolts that I'll be able to mount this assembly on the CNC and then fit the motor back in with the Z-axis motor also in place. Make sure that there's clearance there. It almost fits. So I've got this motor sitting here. This needs to be able to slide down in here like this at an angle, putting the back end in first and then the front end coming down. I think what I need to do is trim off some of this motor mount stand right here on the Z-axis motor to allow this Y-axis motor to be able to rotate down. So that's what I'm going to do next, is take this off, take this block off, and trim this back a bit. Alright, so I trimmed this back, a bit of a curve there, and that is now enough. Let me see if I can do this with one hand. Just slide this in. If I can't do it with one hand, you'll have to trust me that it works. But there, it just kind of plopped down. So now it's a matter of just sliding it backwards, and it's a little bit tight to do that with one hand because I purposely made this box that surrounds this motor mounting plate to be very tight. So I need to spread these out just a little bit with my fingers to be able to slide this back. Once it's slid back, I'll be able to screw everything back together. The next motor to mount is going to be the X-axis motor, what I'm now calling the X-axis motor anyway. It used to be the Y. And the important thing here is to make sure that the motor is as perpendicular to the what will be the sides of the gantry as possible. So I have the top of the gantry taken off and laying down here. Right now it's just laying on top of a piece of the sailboat, and I can't really measure the wood because I don't know if for instance, especially this edge of the wood, I don't know if this is parallel to the armature of the motor. So I have what will eventually be one of the shafts here. This is a 1/4 inch music wire, and I'm using my long 1/4 inch drill bit for the second time now, and not to do drilling, but to come out this end, and eventually I will cut this music wire, and the other half of it will go on this side of the motor. So half of the music wire will be on this side, and the other half of the music wire will be on this side. For right now though, since I haven't cut the wire, I'm going to use this drill bit sticking out the other side. So what I want to do is I want to have this come out through the center of each side. So I'm going to make some marks here of where I want this to be, and then I'll use this this little square to figure out where that would be and line up the shaft of the motor with those marks, and then I'll be able to draw the lines here, drill the holes, and mount this motor mount to the underside of the top piece of wood that goes over the gantry. Alright, I got the X motor mounted. It's behind this motor mount unit here, and that is connected to the top board with 3 bolts, and everything clears. There's distance here between the X motor and the Y motor, and also between the Z motor, so nothing is binding. It's all working out very well. The next thing that needs to be done is to connect the chains, and I'm also waiting for one more 1/2 inch collar. So I have one right here, and this will go around this 1/2 inch lead screw, not down here, but one of them will fit right inside here around the lead screw, and the other one will fit down underneath this, just above the bearing, so back up inside there. So once I should get one of these arriving tomorrow, and then I'll be able to completely fasten down the Z motor. Right now it's just sitting here. The bolts are not actually screwed down or anything yet. So all right, that will be the the next step. But I think all the motors are actually in place, so I'm going to end the video here and get this posted. All right, bye.